So currently in 2022, you can gift $16,000 to anyone without worrying about any gift taxes. That number was $15,000 last year. What that means is that it's a tax-free gift for both you and the person that's receiving the money.
Are you ready for a successful retirement? We're addressing the topics facing today's retirees. Welcome to Retire with Ryan. Now here's your host, Ryan Morrissey.
Welcome back. This week, I'm addressing a listener question, and Jen writes in that she has a CHET 529 college savings plan for her son, John, and he's currently 26, done with school, and she's not sure what are her options for this money. So as a reminder, if anyone has a listener question, you can go to retirewithryan.com and click on the contact button at the top of the page to enter your listener question to be considered for a future episode. So Jen, there's some good news. There are 6 options that are available to you as far as what you can do with this old or unused 529 money. So that's what I'm going to address in this episode. And this is a situation that can happen to a lot of people. A lot of us are saving money for our college education for our children. And there are certain scenarios that could come up where they might not need the money. I think probably a lot of us would be very lucky if these situations happen. One could be that your child gets some type of a scholarship where it ends up covering all of their educational costs, so you don't then have to use this money. Maybe they decide to join the military and they don't end up going to college, or that pays for a lot of their college. Maybe there's an unexpected gift or inheritance from a grandparent or a parent, or they could just decide to go a different route, maybe start a business where they don't end up using this money. So as I mentioned before, there's 6 different options that you could choose if you have unused money in one of these CHET or other state 529 plans. So option 1 is transfer the money to another beneficiary. This is one of the best things about 529 plans is that they're very flexible. At any time, you can change the beneficiary to another qualifying family member. According to the IRS, these include a spouse, son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, adopted child, or descendant, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, siblings or step-siblings, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, father or mother or ancestor of either stepmother, stepfather, uncle, or their spouse, niece, nephew, or their spouse, first cousin or their spouse. So there's a really long list here of people that you could transfer this money to. And keep in mind that when you're making this change, you're not actually giving up control of the money. You're just naming another beneficiary who you could decide to use this money for. If this account is still in your name, it's still your money. It's then your decision at this point to take it out and decide to help this person who you make the beneficiary to pay college-related costs, pay for these qualifying expenses. But as I mentioned, one of those options is yourself. You could make yourself the beneficiary of a 529 account. A lot of people don't realize they could do that, and you could then pay for your own educational costs. Obviously, probably what comes to mind first is you decide to go back to school to pursue some type of additional degree or education. That is an option, so you can pay for the tuition even if you're not a full-time student. If you do become a full-time student, then room and board would also qualify. But additionally, what people don't think about is what if you wanted to study abroad? Maybe you wanted to study in a foreign country. That could qualify. Maybe you love cooking and you want to go to a culinary school. Well, that would qualify. Maybe you love certain sports like golf and you want to go to a golf college. You can do something like that. Maybe if you have a love for aviation, maybe you can go to an aviation school. So there's a whole lot of things outside the box that you may not realize that you could qualify for. I found an article that talks about 4 surprising places that you can use your 529 college savings money for. And I'll put a link to that article where you can read more about these out-of-the-box options, as well as a tool they have where you can search for different eligible institutions that could qualify. And the reason that you would do this is so that you avoid paying the penalty and any taxes by taking non-qualified withdrawals. Qualified withdrawals, as a reminder, are completely tax-free. If you take non-qualified withdrawals, those could be subject to taxes and a 10% penalty. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. Option number 2 is that you could just keep saving the money for your son or daughter or qualified beneficiary. You don't have to take the money out at any point. There is no requirement with a 529. Similar to an IRA, you're probably aware that at age 72 with IRAs, you have to take your money out and you have to take distributions for traditional IRAs. That's not the case with a 529. You could leave the money in there your whole lifetime, and then upon your passing, it would then transfer to whoever your successor account owner is. And let's just say that was your spouse or your child. They would then take over the money, and this could go on for a while. I'm not aware of any limitation for when this money would have to come out. So it's a way that you could build a legacy. And then at any point, if someone down the road wants to use it for qualified expenses, then they can continue to do that. And maybe your son or daughter decide to go back to school later in life, go back to graduate school or pursue some type of professional degree. So you really want to make sure that if you aren't going to be using this money, that it's invested properly. I would say that probably it want to be invested more aggressively in stocks or real estate versus bonds or cash if you aren't going to be using this money for a long time. Option number 3 is to use the money to make student loan payments. This is a newer option that came about as a result of the Secure Act that was passed a few years ago, and it allows families to take tax-free 529 distributions for student loan repayment. Prior to this act, this wasn't allowed, but you can take up to $10,000 to pay for qualified student loan repayments per beneficiary. So let's just say you have 2 children that have student loans and you only have one 529 plan. You could take $10,000 out for one of them, then change the beneficiary to your next child, have them satisfy that, and then you've taken advantage of that lifetime limit. Maybe this lifetime limit will be increased in the future. This is something to keep an eye on because, as we all know, $10,000 when it comes to college costs is a very minor amount when you could have tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt that you're carrying around. But this is an option to take it out and avoid the tax and penalty that could apply. Option number 4 is you could save the money for your grandchild. As I mentioned before, there's no time limit on this money, so you could leave it in your son or daughter's name and wait until they have a child, and then you could name their child as the beneficiary of this money. But keep in mind, anytime you're naming someone as a beneficiary who's more than 2 generations younger than you, so a grandchild or a great-grandchild, you have to be aware of gift taxes that might apply. There also is the negative for anybody that's applying for financial aid, that if you do name your grandchild the beneficiary and they take distributions from this account to cover their educational costs, this will be considered unearned income, which counts on the FAFSA, which could mess things up for them. So it is, unfortunately, you always do one thing and it changes another, but you do want to maybe consider this as an option. Option number 5 is to take advantage of penalty-free scholarship withdrawals. And in some cases, you may be able to take non-qualified withdrawals without having to pay a penalty tax on the earnings. That's the 10% penalty. And this would apply in a situation where the beneficiary passes away, becomes disabled, if they attend a U.S. military academy, or if they get a scholarship. And anytime they get a scholarship, you can withdraw up to the amount of that scholarship to spend on anything you'd like, and you'd avoid this 10% penalty. But keep in mind, you still have to pay income tax on any gains in the account. So how do 529 gains work? Well, let's just say you've contributed $20,000 to your 529 account, and it's now worth $30,000, and you decide to take the account entirely out. Well, then you'd pay tax on the $10,000 gain. That's where the taxes would apply. And if it was a non-qualified distribution, you would also pay a 10% penalty on that gain. So that is, you can take it out in this scenario and not pay the 10% penalty. However, you will still pay income tax on any gains you have. So this might not be the best option for you. And option number 6 is that you can plan to use the money to pay non-qualified expenses, and you could just bite the bullet and you could pay the taxes and any 10% penalty that might apply if you're in a situation where you don't ever think you're going to use this money and you just want to get it over with sooner, then that might be your best option. So as I mentioned earlier, any gains you have are taxable. And unfortunately, you don't have a way to only take out your principal or only take out your gains. If you've listened to some of my other podcasts on Roth IRAs, one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of a Roth IRA is that when you take distributions at any point, your principal comes out first. Your gains come out last, which means you can take out a tax-free distribution from your Roth IRA up to your principal amount at any point, even prior to age 59 and a half. That's not the situation with a 529 account. Every distribution that comes out, what's known as a pro rata distribution, which means that going back to our earlier example, if you have a $30,000 529 plan that you contributed $20,000 into, so you have a $10,000 gain, that's 1/3 of the account. For every non-qualified distribution that you take, about 1/3 of it will be taxable roughly. You can't decide, well, I'm going to take out my contributions first and then leave the gains in there and let the money grow like you could as a Roth. Unfortunately, you can't do that with a 529 plan. At the end of the day, I still think a 529 plan could be a good account because the benefit that you're receiving with this is the money is growing tax deferred while it's in there. You're not paying any taxes on it. If you take it out for qualified expenses, it's tax free. But if you take it out for non-qualified expenses, then you do pay taxes and a 10% penalty. But it probably ends up being about the same that if you took the money and invested it in a taxable investment account, let's say you bought some mutual funds, because within those mutual funds every year, you'd be paying taxes on any capital gains that you have or any dividends or interest. So it probably is the same or a little bit better with a 529 account. However, keep in mind that there still are a number of qualified distributions that you could take where you wouldn't pay taxes or penalties. And just as a reminder, those are for tuition and fees, books, computers, technology and related equipment, internet access, special needs equipment, room and board if the student is enrolled at least half time. You can also take up to $10,000 in K-12 tuition expenses and student loan repayments up to $10,000 and any costs for any apprenticeship programs. So there are a lot of options available to you. And maybe even if you end up having a grandchild down the road, you could change them to the beneficiary. And if they had K-12 tuition, maybe they're going to private school, you could use this to help them pay for that. So I don't think you should give up necessarily on your 529 plan just yet, but this is at least an idea of what your options are if you're planning to do that. So thanks again for the listener question. And if anyone else has a listener question, just as a reminder, go to retirewithryan.com, click on the contact button, put in your name and your listener question, and that will be considered for a future episode. Have a great week, and I look forward to talking again with you next Wednesday. Take care.
You should consult a financial advisor familiar with your specific circumstances before you make any financial decisions. Nothing in this broadcast constitutes a solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Any mention of rates of return are historical or hypothetical in nature and are not a guarantee of future returns. Ryan Morrissey, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Morrissey Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor.